and gentlemen, thank you all for coming. This is going to be a briefing for the media. The chief will make a statement, he'll answer a few questions. Please hold your questions kind of to a minimum and not have three people asking the same question at three different times. So with that, Chief.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for your attendance. Would like to acknowledge some guests that are with us this afternoon. Certainly representing city administration, my boss, the city manager, Jim Borey, a couple of our elected officials, Vice Mayor Rob Coleman, and Dr. Sandra Cherry from City Council, and our elected Sheriff, Gabe Morgan. Appreciate them all being here. Also in attendance today is Commonwealth Attorney Howard Gwynn, who of course has an independent review role that we'll talk about a little bit in a few minutes. Today's press conference is designed to update on our investigation progress to date and provide information about the circumstances of the officer-involved shooting on July 4th. I'd like to start by reiterating our sympathies to the family of Mr. Beatty for their loss. We've tried our best to respect their need for grieving time while following up on our investigation and offering to brief them on information such that we're going to share with you all today. I also wish to express the gratitude of our entire department for those community members who have not only kept Mr. Beatty's family in their thoughts and prayers, but have reached out to the family of the Newport News Police Department. As I'm sure everyone realizes, no one in policing takes joy in the unfortunate death of another. We all understand and believe in the mantra that all lives matter. And we continue to care and provide care and concern for those members of our department who were involved in this incident. Just to recap, a narcotics detective who was working secondary employment in a housing complex received information a bit before 1:00 a.m. on July 4th about a person armed with a sawed-off shotgun. The officer called for a couple of additional officers, and a South Precinct sergeant and a citywide canine officer responded. Now, we've said previously that all of our other South Precinct officers were on other calls for service, and that's why we didn't have an officer there with the body-worn camera. And that statement has been called to question by some folks. It is not unusual in this city or any other community that at times of the day during peak calls for service, all on-duty personnel may be involved in a call for service. That doesn't mean that those are all high-priority calls or that an officer couldn't get pulled off of a routine lower priority call if a higher priority call comes in. At the time of this request, for example, there was no indication that an emergency response was needed or a need to pull off any of those units from lower priority calls, given that there were 2 available units in the vicinity close by and available. In fact, in the immediate aftermath of the shooting, multiple units from South Precinct and some even from other areas of the city immediately proceeded to the scene. This merely explains, and our purpose in explaining this then and again today is to explain that given the assignment of the officers who were there, why there was no video camera. And as we stated at our first press conference, the additional 125 video cameras that have been on order for a few weeks would most likely assure that at least one or two, if not all three, of the officers who were on scene would be equipped with a camera in the future. Now, the three officers came together at approximately 1 a.m. and talked about tactics, and subsequently, about 45 minutes after that, the detective received an update as to the location and direction that the subject armed with the shotgun was walking. The information provided a detailed clothing description: camouflage, military-style jacket, and blue jeans. The detective proceeded north on Oak Street, kept in coordination with the other two officers, and as the officer approached 18th Street, observed two people, including the person wearing a long-sleeve camouflage military-style jacket and blue jeans. It was about that same time that the sergeant pulled up on the scene as well, and the two of them exited their squad cars and verbally engaged the two people, saying, "We need to speak." It was at that time that the detective observed Mr. Beatty's left arm to be held stiffly and tightly to his left side. But other than that, there was no shotgun visible to the detective or the sergeant. The one individual stopped. Mr. Beatty kept walking, and the officers reiterated, "Sir, we really need to speak with you." And at that point, Mr. Beatty began to run up 18th Street towards Peterson Place. Again, they noticed that he still maintained that stiff arm. And about that time, the canine officer arrived and exited their squad car, and initially did not deploy their canine. As the foot pursuit, though, started, the canine officer, anticipating possibly having to do a track, returned to their car and retrieved their dog, their partner. But at that point, they were far enough back that they were kind of out of the pursuit and approached along the sidewalk. Now, as you go down 18th Street, approaching Peterson Place, on the right-hand side, the south side, the sidewalk adjacent to it is kind of a hill that goes up the grassy area. And Mr. Beatty ran up that hill with the sergeant and the detective in pursuit. The canine officer, meanwhile, stayed at the sidewalk level. At some point when they were approaching the buildings, there are two apartment buildings, Mr. Beatty made a turn in direction, and at that point, all three officers observed a sawed-off shotgun being held by a pistol gripped by Mr. Beatty. At that point, they withdrew their weapons and gave the command, "Drop the gun, drop the gun." An independent witness who was not visually in a position to see what was going on has given us a statement that he heard officers give the command, "Drop the gun." Subsequently, officers observed Mr. Beatty begin to turn in the direction of the sergeant, and the canine officer and the detective observed the shotgun being raised in the direction of the detective. At that point, the detective believed the sergeant was in imminent danger of being shot by the shotgun, and he fired 3 rounds. All 3 shell casings were located in the grass and used to approximate the location of where the detective was when he fired his gun. No other shots were fired, and one round struck Mr. Beatty in the head, and he immediately dropped to the ground. The sergeant, who was the closest at that time, immediately moved the shotgun from the area of Mr. Beatty's feet to a safer distance, as officers are trained to do in shooting events involving armed persons. It's unknown to the officers immediately after a shooting what continued threat the armed subject may pose, and so they always try to distance known threats such as the gun from the subject. Radio traffic confirms that medical assistance was summoned immediately upon notification that shots had been fired. The shotgun was located by forensic technicians approximately 10 feet from Mr. Beatty's feet. The technician, not knowing that the sergeant had moved the weapon, asked another officer on scene to make safe the weapon before the technician began to process it. And at that time, it was determined there were no shells inside the weapon. The shotgun has been delivered to the State Crime Lab for fingerprint and DNA examination. We have contacted top state officials and requested that this examination be expedited, and they have agreed to do that. The original owner of the shotgun, who reported it stolen in a burglary, has been interviewed, and the Hampton Police Department is reviewing that case in light of the weapon being recovered from Mr. Beatty. Based upon statements and the physical evidence, we believe the detective who fired the shots was between 20 and 30 feet from Mr. Beatty when the 3 shots were fired. The investigating detectives in this case have finished their interviews of all the involved officers, the known witnesses, other responding officers, and fire personnel. Persons who were identified as potential witnesses have also been interviewed. So far, over 20 interviews have taken place, and detectives have completed canvassing the neighborhood as well. Although the canvass and the interviews have been completed, we are still following up on any additional information that is received. There is misinformation being disseminated in the community, and while it's inconsistent with evidence and known facts, we still follow up on all that information and talking to even potential witnesses. And we encourage anyone with information to contact the department. The radio traffic has been collected and transcribed. The detective's cell phone data has been downloaded, and Mr. Beatty's cell phone is being analyzed by the Virginia State Police due to the fact that our agency does not have the technology to do that on that particular model or type of phone. The department has not received the autopsy report from the medical examiner. Typically, we would not receive that until they've completed their review, including toxicology reports, which take some time to return from the lab. At this point, the department anticipates its criminal investigation will be done sometime perhaps in the latter part of August, but that's merely an estimation at this point. And that does not include those elements outside our control, such as the findings of the crime lab, the cell phone info from the state police, or the autopsy report. Once the case is completed, including the completed autopsy report, it will be forwarded to the Commonwealth Attorney's Office for review. There's a national discussion going on among police leaders as to the issue of releasing the name of the involved officers. Now, the historic policy and practice of the Newport News Police has been to not release that information. And in fact, our current policy specifically prohibits that pertaining to witness or actor information prior to any criminal charges being filed. We've consulted with several police leaders who have implemented various policies that allow for some information release at some point in time. We've also consulted with community leaders, including pastors known as the concerned clergy, who urged us to be fair and consistent and to follow our policies the same in all cases. One of the aspects that other police agencies have advised us that always influences their decision to release information is the presence of intelligence on threats to the officers involved. Now, we've taken all of these factors into consideration and then consulted with the Commonwealth Attorney. And our conclusion on this issue is that at the time the Commonwealth Attorney announces their findings as a result of the review, the name of the officer who fired the shots may be released. In the meantime, we can provide the following limited background. The narcotics detective who fired the shots has 8 years with the Newport News Police Department and has been involved in one prior officer-involved shooting. The K-9 officer has 10 years with the Newport News Police Department and has not been involved in any prior officer-involved shootings. And the sergeant has 9